Welcome to Forge the Man, professional excellence meet vocational clarity. Through the intercession of Mary, Mother of fairest love, and the teachings of Saint Jose Maria Escrivá, we help Catholic men sanctify their work and find their mission. Whether you are called to build a family or serve the kingdom in the world as a single man, the forge is hot, the hammer's ready. Let's get to work. Today I have a special guest, and he will help me pay a little tribute to three men that passed away on June 18th. And we'll get into that here in a minute. But first, my guest. John Kaiser Sott grew up in Arlington, Texas, great state of Texas, and then he studied international relations at the University of Southern California, here in Southern California. Then he went on to law school at the University of Texas in Austin. He practiced transactional law for 25 years and now teaches at the University of Dallas. He also provides consulting and educational services to businesses and to business people. John, welcome.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
John, can you kind of fill in the gaps of maybe some of the things that I did not include in your bio?
Okay, great. Yeah. I did practice law for 25 years. And then after that, I kind of found my true professional calling where I teach at the university in the field of business ethics, which really, as a student of mine said last fall after his final exam, we do oral exams, and he said, the first few weeks, I didn't know what to expect from business ethics. I think a lot of places it's a kind of a dry course for a lot of people. And he said, we got into it and we started talking about virtues and character and being the kind of person that we aspire to be. And I realized it's not just an academic course, it's a course in personal development. It's a personal development course. And so I'm just lucky to have the opportunity to help students develop and become the kind of person that they aspire to be, to live according to their highest ideals in their vocation to business.
John, today we're going to talk about three men. I knew two out of the three very well. And there was an unfortunate accident on June 18th of 2025 up at Rattlesnake Falls in Northern California. And I'd like to talk about these three men. They had a vocation as numerary members of Opus Dei, like yourself. So first of all, Opus Dei emphasizes finding God in daily life, the secular world. How did Val, Matt Anthony, Matt Schoenecker, how did they live out their professional work and their daily lives?
Yeah, that's a great question. We have a half hour here and I could spend a whole half hour answering that question if you wanted. But yes, they were numerary members of Opus Dei. Now, the vast majority of people in Opus Dei are laymen, laywomen. They have secular jobs. The mission we have in Opus Dei is to help people sanctify their lives and themselves and others through ordinary responsibilities, work, family responsibilities. And really, it's about giving glory to God, which is the universal vocation that every human being has, to give glory to God. And we help people discover how to do that in and through their ordinary responsibilities by loving God in doing their work to the greatest excellence that they can. For love of God and service to others. And so Matt, and Val really lived that. Val was an accountant for over 35 years, greatly respected by his colleagues. And Matt had a little bit different path because Matt Schoenecker did a PhD in bioengineering. He was working on very advanced things in cochlear implants for ears and hearing. But he was not only really good at that, but he had a lot of other really good qualities. And he was asked if he would consider becoming the director of an Opus Dei center. I'll describe that in a moment. Where he basically was involved in the formation, the Catholic spiritual formation and human formation of men and also young men and boys. I mentioned a center of Opus Dei. It's a vast majority of people in Opus Dei are married and have families and live out in the middle of the world like everyone else. But some of the people in Opus Dei are called to what we call apostolic celibacy. And that is, rather than getting married, dedicating our whole life and all of our love to the service of God and souls, still as laymen or laywomen and still in secular jobs. But Matt were both asked if they would consider working in, I guess, what you could call internal jobs in Opus Dei, which is still not a clerical job, so to speak. So Matt Schoenecker was a mentor to young people and young and old. Matt Anthony, also very talented. He studied classics in college, and he taught in a high school called the Heights in Virginia for a while. And then he was asked if he would work internally, and eventually he was asked to kind of be assisting the work that Opus Dei does with young men throughout the United States. And eventually he was asked to go to Rome to help on that work in planning and administering that work or leading that work, supporting the people on the ground from Rome for the entire world. And then he came back to the United States about 3 years, now 4 years ago, to help in the administration and running of Opus Dei's planning and activities for the entire United States and Canada region.
Yeah, I know. I've heard a lot of good things about Matt Anthony. I did not know Matt Anthony and Matt Schoenecker. They're very gifted people. I know that when we first were talking about it, they were very talented and such great virtues. So, Matt too wasn't he a diver in college?
Yes, Matt Schoenecker was a diver in college. Great athlete. Great athlete. Always in great shape. And some of the qualities he has maybe come from his athletic experience. Always, he's always ready, always instantly ready to help out. I remember on June 18th when we were on our way out to Rattlesnake Falls in the morning, there were 7 of us and we kind of broken up into 2 groups. At some point, we realized 2 of the guys were a bit behind. So one of them caught up and said, well, this other guy had a family emergency. He had to go back to the car where he can be on the phone with his family and is not going to come on the hike. And then immediately Matt realizes, well, the guy's phone's going to run out of juice. And so immediately, without hesitation, Matt's mind goes to, I'll run back. It was about a mile. And he ran back and took a battery pack back to the other guy so that he would have a phone that lasts all day to help support his family that was in a kind of distressful situation. That's Matt Schoenecker. He never hesitated to help others out. He would go the extra mile. Literally, in this case, he went the extra mile. Matt Anthony was also, they both were intellectually brilliant. And Matt Anthony, when he was young, he was loud and boisterous, still to some degree when he was older, but he is a person that I respect. And actually, I kind of go to his intercession. He's a person who really developed maybe rough around the edges and could be hard on people early on. And he honed that over the course of his life. He really developed character, intentionally working on himself to where he had a tremendous human refinement and great leadership qualities. He worked internally in Opus Dei, but people who worked with him were convinced that he could have been easily the CEO of some, significant company just based on the qualities of leadership that he had. And that came in large part from just always being dedicated to serving God through work very well done.
You say you're on the annual course with them. Can you tell us a little bit what an annual course is for numeraries?
Okay, so I mentioned numeraries live what we call apostolic celibacy, and the numeraries live together in houses we call centers of Opus Dei, which is like a residence with maybe 10 or a dozen men living there, and it's a household. It's we live family life. We have dinner together. We also live a spiritual plan of life. All the members of Opus Dei go to daily mass if they can. Spend some time in mental prayer, spend some time in praying the rosary, spiritual reading, things like that. But in the center of Opus Dei, we live a family life like an ordinary family would. It's also not just a household, but it's a hub of activities for formation of men and classes, people coming in, getting spiritual guidance, things like that. And in order for the numeraries to carry that out, we need a lot of continuing education in our spiritual life and in our understanding of Catholic teaching, and understanding of basically what makes people tick and what makes things work. And so every year, the numeraries in Opus Dei spend 3 weeks, roughly a year, studying theology and other things that help equip us continually to be well prepared and capable of helping others in those ways. So we were at an annual course. We call that an annual course. With that particular annual course, one of the classes we were studying was on the virtue of justice, how to live justice with people in our relationships and society and all of that. And the annual course is also, of course, a time of vacation, a family time for us to spend with one another.
Myself being a supernumerary, I do an annual course, which is only a week, but That's one of the highlights of my year because I'm with other men, the camaraderie, and even though we study, it's a lot of fun. And, my son is a numerary, and he just really looks forward to that, the camaraderie. All over the United States, you guys are crossing paths, so maybe every year you'll have your annual course with somebody differently.
And, it is really a great time. God calls each of us to a different path, but he calls everybody to serve him with their whole life, right? It's like for you, married in a family, God calls you to serve with your whole life as a father and husband, as a professional, and for the numeraries also. In a sense, people say, oh, you make such a sacrifice, but it's actually a joy to live as God calls us to spend our time serving other men and helping them to seek holiness as well.
John, if it's not too difficult for you to do this, I know it'd be hard for me, but can you kind of explain? I know you touched on it a little bit. Can you give us some of the details as to what occurred on that day?
Yes, I can. I'd like to shine the light on their example. So I'll tell what happened, but in the context, maybe tell some examples of their character that showed up during that day. So long story short, we went on, I think it's about a 7-mile hike down into a valley, and then there's some waterfalls down there, and then it's a 7-mile hike back up. And in an overview nutshell, we hiked in, and we chose to do some swimming at the falls, and it was more dangerous than we expected. So Matt Schoenecker and I went in and made our way out, but then Val followed, and we realized that he was in distress. And long story short, Matt Schoenecker, in his typical way, did not hesitate, and he went in to help Val. And Matt Anthony also saw that Val was in distress, and he hadn't been in the water yet, but he took off his shoes and went in to help Val. I didn't go to the edge to see what happened. I kept my eyes laser focused on the kind of there's a area around the corner where we came back out of the water. And I was expecting the Matt to come around the corner, and I was concerned that they would come around the corner and be disappointed that they hadn't been able to save Val because he had called out in distress. And it was a treacherous situation, but then they didn't come around the corner, and we waited and we waited. And then so we realized, and so some of the guys that were there went to different areas where they could get a vista to see, did they make it out of the water in a different place and all of this. And so long story short, the three of them had drowned. So those are kind of the events that happened. And I would like first to shine the light on some of the qualities that they lived. Matt, of course, were unhesitating in going to save Val. I was not in as good shape as them, and there were two very capable swimmers going in, concerned that I might become a liability if I joined them. I did not. But I mentioned Matt Schoenecker had, earlier on the trip, gone back to deliver the battery pack. And it's just his character to be of service to the others. Val, very interesting. Val is about 5'5". He's not a big guy. Big things come in little packages. And Val he just has the biggest heart. There's this virtue. I teach virtues in class, and magnanimity, or being great souled, is one of the virtues. And that's Val. And he had the biggest heart. You could never contain his love for people. And he was always cheerful and always helping people. Before we went on the trip, we get in the car early in the morning, and what had happened? Val, with his big generosity, had gone out and rented a SUV, bought all kinds of food. And of course, Val does everything in abundance, so we had far more food than we needed. It was just Val's big overflowing generosity. It was great. And then when we were hiking out there, early on in the hike, Val came to me and said, "John," I'm like, "Val," and he says, "We need to have a new program for young men coming out of college to help them develop the practical wisdom and the courage or encouragement that they need to launch out into the project of their lives, having a family, getting started, because so many people are waiting these days. So many people are putting it off, or getting distracted with things, or." And he said, "We really need to help people to do this." And that's Val. We're on a hike in the wilderness, and he's thinking about people. On the drive there, he had been on the phone, texting friends and introducing people. He always introduced and connected people together. You know him very well. So, Val, big heart, big heart. So we were talking about this, and he says, I want to have a program for people, for men. And I'm like, well, Val, you're in LA and I'm in Texas. Why are you telling me about this? And, or at least that's what's going through my head. And so I say, well, and I start thinking, well, to reach a lot of people, maybe the thing to do would be a podcast. So I suggested to him maybe a podcast, and he thought that was a good idea. And as you know, that's one of the motivators that we have. I know you'd been thinking for a while about doing a podcast, but at some points in planning this podcast, we had called it Val's Podcast, seeking his intercession and following his inspiration in the themes that you are working with on this podcast.
Yes. Well, I just want to speak to the courage of Matt Anthony and Matt Schoenecker. I was a firefighter for a number of years. But one thing about a firefighter, when we leave the station, we have all our equipment with us. We have our teams with us. We have something called an SOG, Standard Operating Guidelines. So we kind of really already are prepared. We're like a football team, and the captain calls a play. But for Matt Anthony, Matt Schoenecker, there was no indication this was going to happen. And I know that Matt Schoenecker was an experienced diver, but if you look at those falls, it's quite intimidating. I know for myself, even though I was a firefighter, I'm going to hesitate before I jump in there. But I really, now, what do you think are some of the things, some of the traits or habits that they had? They see a friend struggling. What do you think prepared them to, without hesitation, jump into that water?
Yeah, a lot of things. Something that, all three of those guys had was they're models of friendship. They really lived for others, right? And if you live for others, then it becomes second nature to help them, right? And so what happened is for Matt and Matt, it was second nature. It was something they didn't have to think about to try to help him, okay? And that comes from a lifetime of really spending themselves for the sake of others. Matt Schoenecker, I've heard from people about in the LA area, you know this very well, um, young men and parents who saw that Matt Schoenecker would always go out of his way. It was like he was always available to mentor, to spend time with these young men. He would always, it just it immediately comes to people's mind when they talk about him. So friendship. And then they also were dedicated to excellence in their work, which involves an unhesitating commitment to doing things well. And I think part of that is what makes it second nature for them to take a courageous action right away like that. And of course, another important quality that they had that helped them in those moments is just that they're men of prayer. They're men of lives of dedicated service. And they've chosen to give everything to God and to do that in service of other people. So over the course of many years, they became disposed such that, their habitual way of thinking and their outlook was to take care of others, to take care. And so it's only natural that they took care of Val. So I would go with that. There's so much more to say, but what else?
Well, you know what, as you were speaking, a couple of things came to mind. Our founder says, Ipsi Christus, Alti Christus. And I think if you are listening to the Holy Spirit, and like these men, I'm sure you guys probably said the rosary on the way in. So you're listening to the prompting of the Holy Spirit, and they acted. And the other thing is, too, is that, like you were saying, the ordinary everyday virtues that they developed, when it was time to act in a heroic manner, they were ready. In a sense, they did their spiritual push-ups before the big game. Now, it's been a year now, almost a year. How does someone process that grief? Now, I'm still having a hard time with it because I was in regular contact with Val almost every week. And I still wait for him to come around the corner. I really do. And then I try not to dwell on it too much. But how does one process the grief? And then also, like, what are the lessons that we still here living can take from that event that happened?
Yes. I saw the three of them from time to time. I didn't see them every year. Sometimes I'd go to one of these annual courses or see them at some other event, spend a few weeks here and there with them. And I knew them. I knew them well, but I didn't know them as well as the people who grew up with them, the people who lived many years with them, the people like yourself. You dealt with Matt Schoenecker and Val regularly. Your kids were mentored by Matt Schoenecker. You saw Val every week, and that's difficult. I understand that's difficult. And I think some events that took place there at Rattlesnake Falls helped me a lot, and maybe they can be helpful to others. And that is in the moments after basically when I realized that they had drowned. There's a lot of places our mind can go in that situation. It is very tragic, right? It is a traumatic set of circumstances, right? And I think just by the grace of God, nothing extraordinary. This is just where my thoughts went. But the first thing that came to mind when I realized that they had drowned was that between their holy lives and God's mercy, God writes the rules. And I was convinced that their path to heaven was very rapid. So rapid that, by the time I finished thinking about it, I was convinced that they were in heaven, right? It's just the thoughts that went through my head, but I consider it a grace of God those are the thoughts that went through my head at that time. And then shortly after, you're in this situation and you don't know what to think, and it's kind of shocking. It's very shocking, right? And the next big thing that came to my mind is kind of a calm assurance, confident assurance that as tragic as those circumstances and events were, that God's going to draw some great, great good, right? That out of their lives, out of their deaths, that somehow God is going to draw some greater good. And again, it wasn't, I didn't feel some kind of divine intervention, but but I had that sense of assurance in my mind. And then shortly after, well, we had to go through the process of using the satellite function on the phone and get in touch with the authorities, and took a long time, took a very long time. But then once the helicopter was on its way, we stopped and we prayed the rosary. And another grace, so to speak, is that in praying the rosary, it was nothing extraordinary, but I had the sense that the three of them were praying the rosary together with us. And so I think we can draw from that something that can be helpful to us all in dealing with their passing. And the first is, I personally think that we can be sure that they are with God in heaven. And that's the very best thing, the best thing that can happen to a person, and the best thing that we can ultimately desire for ourselves and our friends as our ultimate destination. So, as tragic and difficult as it is, there's something very, very good because they're with God in heaven. And so, then the second thing is this assurance that God would draw some kind of good. Well, we can have a confident hope that God will do great good from their lives and their deaths. And by their lives, they are witnesses to the goodness of God. And I think God will use their deaths as a way of shining light on their exemplary lives for the good of many people. And I hope that over the years, many people give testimony to their exemplary virtue and holiness in their lives because they really are outstanding. I seek their intercession in particular ways according to each one's character and strengths that I need to develop myself. But they had developed these things very, very well. So I think there's a lot of hope that we can have that God will draw a great good out of this. And then third, sensing that they were praying the rosary with us just helps us to remember. I personally believe that they are praying with us, interceding for us. We have very close friends in heaven, right? They're there with God and they're here with us, right? And so I think those three things, I hope that helps give some consolation and hope to those who are suffering the loss.
Yeah, it's almost like, for me, I felt like I was a boxer, I got stung, but really quickly I was reminded to have a supernatural outlook, that this is not our home, we're passing through. And then sort of when I get reoriented, okay, you know what? And there's something that our founder promised, if that we stayed close to him, he would guarantee us heaven. And those men were living that. They had a plan of life. They went to Mass daily. They recited their rosary daily. They made a visit to the Blessed Sacrament. All the things that we do as members of Opus Dei. And it's just a great reminder that if we let the Holy Spirit dwell in our soul, if we cooperate, we do not know. Death will come like a thief in the night when we least expect it. I lost a mother when I was 5 years old. She was only 31. She left 3 boys. I lost a older brother who's a year older than me. He passed away at 31 and left 3 children. And that sobered me up, and I have a different outlook because of that. And I think for me, it reminds me that I don't know how much more time I have. The other day, I heard of a firefighter who was much younger than me, was 55 years old, had a cardiac arrest and passed away. So it's just a reminder to have a supernatural outlook and that we know not the time nor the date when the good Lord's going to call us.
If I can jump in there, I think that's really important point That's really an important point. Um, Saint Josemaria would say that the divine filiation is kind of like the foundation of our interior life, right? And that is that we know that we are children of God. We know we're beloved children of God. Our Lord, in redeeming us, made us God's children. And this sense of divine filiation is something that, what is a sense of, what does that mean? Well, if we spend time in our lives, in our days dedicated to spending time with God, and we do what we can, we don't spend the whole day praying. Well, we try to be in the presence of God all day long. But in order to be able to do that and have a sense of the presence of God, awareness of the presence of God throughout all of our activities, to work together with God rather than just on our own, and you've talked about that in those norms of the plan of life, prayer, mass, rosary, spiritual reading, things like that. But what we're aiming at is this sense of divine filiation, which is the outlook. How does a person who knows, more than knows, their identity is that they are a child of God, of this beloved God who loves them so much. And then it shapes the outlook. It shapes how you look at events. It shapes how you deal with the small things of each day and the big events that arise. I think that was an important point that you brought up.
I'd like to discuss some of the good memories we have of them. Maybe we can both do this. Val, I text people all the time, and some people are slow to text me back, but anytime I would text Val, I would get a quick reply. I mean, he was the best. I really miss that. Another thing is too, Val, my father passed away a few months before Val passed, and Val was at the funeral. And I remember he came right up to me. Val was the kind of person who would get really close to you. And he smiled. He goes, "Hey, Paul, your dad's in the right place. He lived a great life." And, Val was just full of just joy. He was always beaming. And then Matt Schoenecker, my son was telling me that he was his mentor, and he was just like all ears and took him serious. And my son was like stunned by that. He was a high school student. He had coaches and teachers, but finally he meets this young man, well educated, who took him serious. And and I help with the summer camp. And 2 years ago, I was with Matt, and just him managing the boys and managing the staff. There was an issue that came up we had to meet, and that guy was cool as a cucumber and how he handled it.
Yeah. Matt Schoenecker was a model of fidelity in relationships, that he was available. He was responsive. You talk to Matt Schoenecker and he looks into your eyes and he's locked in. You're like, this guy, I don't know if I've ever had anybody listen to me so closely as this guy is listening to me right now. And he really cares. And it was just his look and his way of being. And I think that's it. He lived his whole life that way. This availability to the young people whom he mentored and to all the people in his life, the immediate responsiveness. Yeah, sure, I'll go take him the battery pack for the phone, right away. And I'll go the extra mile. He didn't say I'll go the extra mile, but his actions spoke for him, right? He did go precisely an extra mile. Um, Val is just I I remember Val, he had some phrases, you know what I'm saying, right? You know what I'm saying? And, yeah, I can see it, right? And I can hear you're probably thinking correctamundi, right? Yeah,
That's right.
and,
Yeah.
correctamundi. Val had this incredible, joyful way. He was imperturbable, you could tease him, and he was a great sport. He always was encouraging to people, always encouraging. And it was just like, I was amazed because I would see Val and I would realize he's just not thinking about himself. He's thinking about other people all the time. And he's connecting people. He's encouraging them. And I think of Matt Anthony. He was a big guy and boisterous, super competitive when he was young, super, super competitive. And he's just this model of working on oneself and becoming the best version of yourself. And I go to his intercession for that all the time. Every time that I'm struggling with my old habits, I turn to Matt and say, help me work on myself like you did. I mean, over the years, there's just so many, uh, from being a loud, boisterous person, he didn't stop being himself, but he was so attentive to other people. He was so attentive to what's good for other people. and in dealing with them, so diplomatic. Something you wouldn't have expected when he was a little kid. I didn't know him as a little kid, but that's what I hear, right? And so, but he let God sculpt him into a great man, and I really admire that.
Yeah, I was talking to Anthony Giuntini, and he was telling that Matt Anthony had a big role in his life, helping him see his vocation. He was telling me one day when he was at the Heights, he was attending at Heights, and a number of boys in the classroom were acting out, and Matt, he shot something sort of like out of his mouth, out of a straw at the boys, and they got his attention. And you know what I like about that is that there's a tendency, like if you're a good Catholic man, you're really docile and soft, but these are men that like, hey, we're not fooling around. We're here to study, knock it off. But then at the same time, they come back and say, hey, they'll hug you and say, hey, look, just pay attention to class. I really have liked that. Um, so if a young man today is discerning a vocation, whether it's marriage or the single state, like how can Val, Matt Anthony, and Matt Schoenecker, if they could speak to us, these young men today, what advice would they offer them in discerning the vocation that God may have for them, whether it's to be married or to the single state?
Yeah. Well, if you want to respond to God's call, I think to follow their example, you develop the qualities of the kind of person who is able to respond to God's call, whatever that call may be, whether it be marriage, whether it be celibacy in the service of God. And there are many paths in the church, right? Many people who come around, or some people who come around the center of Opus Dei, where I live in Dallas, wind up at the Cistercian Abbey down the street, and that's wonderful. But Matt, and Val give us an example of developing the qualities that you need in order to respond well to God's call. And that involves generosity, it involves courage, it involves piety, and it involves fidelity to our friends. And so if you work on those things, right? Because with prayer and with a good spiritual advisor, you can figure out what God is calling you to. Okay. But the difficult thing, and I think there's been a trend in recent generations that people have a hard time committing themselves. And so if you want to really commit and learn to commit yourself, because Matt and Val, they lived life to the full because they committed and because they gave themselves completely to God. And you and people in married life do the same thing. By giving yourself completely to God, you in your state, in your marriage, in your family life, your professional life, you live life to the full. But in order to do that, you need certain virtues. And one of them, as I mentioned, is generosity. So we do that by practicing acts of generosity in little things day in and day out. You know, Matt, and Val, like Saint Josemaria taught us, would first thing in the morning, getting out of bed, what do you say? Latin word, serviam, I will serve, right? That's what I'm about. I'm about responding to God's call. And then you look for little opportunities throughout the day. Little opportunities. Like, I remember the refinement of these guys just at the dinner table, you know. Before pouring the water for themselves, they'd offer it to the person next to them, just little bits of service, right? So if we develop ourselves into generous persons, then we're capable of responding to God's call. If we don't develop ourselves into people who are willing to commit, who have the courage to commit, who have the generosity to commit, then we might know what God's calling us to, but not be able to do it. And that's unfortunate, right? So work on developing the character, work on developing the qualities to live according to your highest ideals. And then surround yourself with people who are good mentors, who live these things, who can help you see the truth and learn to live according to the truth. So I would say those are some things that I think they give good example of.
John, I'm very indebted to Val and Matt because they formed my younger boys. Sometimes a father, as the children get older, they kind of don't listen to dad as much because they hear the same droning voice. But now they hear it from another man that also practices the faith, that's really a good professional, and now they'll listen. And I'd say these guys are good-looking young men. They're very athletic. They don't want to get married, but I can see now as the fruit of that sacrifice I'm experiencing in my family. Val knew my oldest son, Richard, who's 38 now, who's a numerary, and Val had a hand in him recognizing his vocation. And I just spoke with Richard the other day, and he's going to be going to Pennsylvania to help with a program for young men. And That's the fruit of Val's work. John, as we close, you yourself as a numerary, and you're a lawyer for 25 years, and you work in the business world. You mentor a lot of people, and then now you teach at the University of Dallas in philosophy. What would your advice be to my audience, which are young men, action items that they can take after reflecting on Val, Matt Anthony, and Matt Schoenecker? What would you say to them as we close?
Look for the opportunity. Figure out what are the qualities that I really want to characterize me. If what do I want on my epitaph? What do I want people to describe me as when I'm not there? And why, right? And it comes down to some of these core virtues that we need to have, loving God above all, but then loving others. Our love of God makes it possible for us to love others more and than we would otherwise. Learning to be generous, learning to be great-souled like Val, with a heart that doesn't stop, right? And then learning to be courageous, and these guys showed their courage, and to be tenacious, to stick with things. What I do in my teaching is we have a business ethics course, and we talk about, ethical dilemmas and, what the purpose of business is in society. But really, where the rubber meets the road is what are the qualities that we need to have to serve well in our career and in our life. And so I would encourage everyone to figure out what are those qualities that I need to develop, and then how do I develop those qualities? How do I work on it day in and day out? Sometimes in life we have to take risks. If a person just waits and waits and waits until they know that they're ready for whatever God's calling them to, then they might never do it. Because when are we ready? We're only ready with the grace of God. We're not ready because we're fully equipped, right? And God helps us. He makes up the difference, right? So I would say, just like the name of your podcast, we need to forge ourselves to become the man that God calls us to be and that others need from us in our lives.
Well, thank you, John, for your words of wisdom and your time. Thank you for joining us in the Forge today. Discernment isn't a one-time event. It's a daily yes to God's providence. As you navigate your professional growth this week, pray for the courage to follow where He leads into the deep waters of marriage or the dedicated service of the single life. May Mary, Mother of the fairest love, be your guide and your protector to love and serve the Lord in the middle of the world. Thank you again, John.
Thank you.